In this episode of the Orange Nerd Show, we are joined by family here on the channel, Mr. Matthew Muir, all the way from the UK here on the channel. Members, if you are a member of OG55, we have reached out to our members to ask them, like, what do you want us to discuss? What topics would you like us to discuss here on the channel? We got a ton of topics from our members. Today, we are discussing the topic that Mr. Matthew Muir picked for us to discuss up next here on the Orange Nerd Show. Welcome aboard, everybody, to another episode of the Orange Nerd Show. Just so everybody knows, the Orange Nerd Show is a little show we have here on the channel where we discuss everything really except the theme parks, right? So we discuss the movies, the studio, the streaming. We even do like music video reactions, corporate stuff. So this is really the world of Disney and even outside of Disney that exists beyond those theme parks. Mr. Matthew Muir, it's always good to have you on here, and I do appreciate you coming on, being, the time difference over there in the UK. But how you doing?
Very good, thank you.
You are very welcome, Matthew. If you could just remind everybody, and I will be linking it down below, but if you can remind everybody where they can find you on social media, Matthew.
You can find me on Instagram under matthewthomasmuir, all one word, and you can find me on Blue Sky under mattmuir24, all one word.
There he is, Mr. Matthew Muir. All right, here we go. This is Matthew's topic. And I'm going to read the first paragraph, and then we're going to discuss it. And then I'll leave it up, though, so everyone at home can kind of read the rest of which is great stuff here, Matthew. It really is. But Matthew here says, I really think you guys should make a more philosophical video about whether or not one can ever truly be too old for Disney. I like this. A great topic. Like, not even outgrowing the company as a whole, but not being able to revisit its short films because they consider them too gag driven and lacking in a substantial enough story. I do think it applies to some viewers, the notion that the older and wiser you become, the more story you need, which Walt viewed as a complete fallacy. The video should be titled something along the lines of Why You Can Never Be Too Old for Disney. Matthew, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on this? On being too old for Disney, basically outgrowing the older films because it came from a different era. If you watch something like Alice in Wonderland, for example, right? It's from the 1950s. Can someone today rewatch Alice and still get a lot of value out of that movie, even though that storytelling might have been a little bit more simpler back then? What say you, Matthew?
In some cases, like, it depends on whether or not it's the first thing you're brought up on. Like, let's just say you were like me, you were brought up on Star Wars and Marvel and Harry Potter, also all of which had a much grittier interpretation of magic. And so you end up viewing Disney through that lens. Can you still enjoy it under those pretenses, though, or not?
Right. No, absolutely. Like, and yeah, it does really kind of depend on the person too. Like for me personally, I like all of it. Like when I say I like all of it, I mean, I'm not saying I like every Disney movie, but I like, like, for example, I don't mind getting a little deeper, right? Like, for example, like Hunchback of Notre Dame. That's a pretty deep situation. That movie is pretty dark, and it's
probably Disney's darkest animated film.
Absolutely, Matthew. I 100% agree with you. That movie goes deeper, I would say, than something like Alice in Wonderland, right? But I can watch both of these films and enjoy both of these films for what they are, right? Like, I don't need every movie to be Hunchback. I don't need every movie to hit those same emotional buttons that Hunchback.
The Lion King or Aladdin.
Right, or even The Lion King or Aladdin, exactly. So I think that it's one of those things where it's like, I think that, at least for me, I can kind of like take things for what they are and enjoy them for what they are. So I can revisit some of these older movies and still get value from it. Now, Matthew, I want to ask you, do you feel, though, the general public, because we are not the general public, we are very much, Disney diehards, right? The hardcore fans, so to speak. Do you feel that the normies, though, have an issue understanding this, where they can watch a movie like Alice or watch a movie like Peter Pan or whatever it is, and with their more simplistic story?
Potentially.
You say potentially? If you want to go ahead and elaborate on that, brother.
I say potentially because because if they've seen all manner of other media, they might I think they might need to watch Alice in Wonderland or Peter Pan at least once or twice to fully understand. They might at first perceive it to be a little too wacky and a
Yeah.
little too childlike, at least at first, anyway.
Right, right. Yeah, no, yeah, it's possible. It's possible. I want to dip into here, this second paragraph, actually. I kind of use that as jumping point for more conversation here because I think this is very interesting. It says here, and in said video, I think you should provide a few examples of how Walt himself fought tooth and nail to dispel the notion that you could ever outgrow Disney in any capacity. Not even its simpler and wackier stories from 1930s through the 1960s. One major example being his creative outburst during the production of The Jungle Book. See, I love this, Matthew. I just want to stop real quick. You have so much knowledge and perspective on Disney and especially this animation. I absolutely love it and respect that a whole lot. You say here, one major example being the creative outburst during the production of The Jungle Book, where he railed against concerns from his story team that a deeper plot was needed. And also, this rather iconic quote from Walt from 1938, quote, wait, hold on one second. I'm like losing my spot here. Quote, in planning a new picture, we don't think of grown-ups and we don't think of children, but we think, but just of that fine, clean, unspoiled
But
spot down deep in every one of us that maybe the world has made us forget and that maybe our pictures can help recall. I love that. See, and that's the thing. This is one of the reasons why I think it's very hard to really outgrow Disney in terms of like, you know, just maturity, so to speak, right? Because Disney isn't for kids. And this is the one thing that I've railed against for so long, Matthew.
it never was.
It never was. It was never for kids. When people say, well, the theme parks, those are for kids. You shouldn't have drinking in the parks. These parks are for kids. It was never for kids. Kids are part of that equation 100%. It's a family. Yes, kids are part of the family, but so are the adults. The adults are every bit as part of that family as the kids. Same goes for the movies. Walt Disney was not making films and shows for kids. He was making it for everybody, right? And that's why it's really hard to outgrow Disney, because how do you outgrow something that's for everybody? You can literally be 8 or 80 and get something out of these films, you know? So I think it's very difficult from a maturity standpoint to outgrow Disney, because this is not a brand that was designed just for children. But what are your thoughts on that in terms of the actual age, you know, and the maturity levels of people? Can you outgrow Disney, Matthew?
I don't think you can. And I actually do think the quote I chose was particularly noteworthy because it was published literally just as Pinocchio was going into production, literally hot on the heels of Snow White, while short films were still the studio's main income.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that I really, really respect and love about Walt Disney is that the way, like you were saying, like Pinocchio, and we have movies like Bambi and things like that, where it's like, and this plays to what you're saying about outgrowing Disney. He really didn't see this as children's art. He saw it as something for everybody, and you see that in the product. When Walt Disney with Bambi, when he had that scene, that really emotional scene where the mother gets shot, right? Bambi's mother dies. Like that's great. Like that's great storytelling. It's very emotional, and he wasn't talking down to the audience because kids are in the audience. He was going to tell the story the way he wanted to tell a story, and he felt kids could handle that, right? And he was right? Pinocchio, a very, very dark movie, right? Very dark film. He wasn't talking down to children. He was making this film for kids, but also for the broader audience of everybody, our age, older, whatever. So, you know, that's why it's very difficult, in my opinion, to outgrow this brand, because it really was never designed just for a certain age group. How do you outgrow something that wasn't designed for a certain age in the first place? You know what I'm saying? Now, do you feel, Matthew, in your opinion, though, current Disney, do you feel they have lost a little bit of that? Do you feel nowadays
They're trying too hard.
You feel they're trying too hard? In what way?
I think they are. I think in many ways I think it's like they're veering in several different directions. One minute they're trying too hard for kids, then next they're trying too hard for adult viewers.
So they're kind of going from one extreme to the other in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and honestly, some of the films from the near the end of the Dark Age, which flopped really badly, felt too dark.
Which ones exactly? If you can give
A
us a
number of
few.
them, like Fox and the Hound and Black Cauldron, a lot of critics at the time said that those films were too dark.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've heard that, especially when it comes to Black Cauldron, which I actually liked Black Cauldron. I did, but I could see that complaint. And Fox and the Hound, oh gosh, that's like a heart-wrenching story. I mean, that's all, wild. But yeah, that's true. I mean, Walt Disney was really good at Walt Disney, obviously a genius, but like Walt Disney was so brilliant in the way he was able to sort of balance that stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, Bambi had a lot of dark moments, but a lot of positivity and hope as well, and just beautiful storytelling. And it's like, and same with Pinocchio. And I think when Walt passed away, his artists, his team, I felt like had a hard time sort of
Coping
navigating
with the
that.
absence.
Yeah. Yeah, it showed, right? I mean, not to downplay like the Nine Old Men, and I mean, obviously not to downplay them. They are giants in animation. They are absolute geniuses, each and every one of them. But I think Walt's guidance really did help, like, sort of like kind of guide that ship. And I feel like you're right, Matthew, where a lot of these films after Walt, up until excuse me, up until Eisner came back in like the mid 80s, a lot of those films really struggled to come up with that balance, right? Where it was like they were going too dark, or maybe they're trying to be too kiddish. Where if Walt was around, I think they would have had a much more of a balance, Now, Michael Eisner came in the mid '80s, and I feel like he kind of restored that, though. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like,
Yeah.
I do think. Do you think, in the case of Hunchback of Notre Dame, do you think the signs of Frank Wells' absence were already starting to show the fact that Michael Eisner wanted it to go as dark as it ultimately did, or would you say that the after effects of Wells dying didn't really start to show at least until 1999?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think we really started to see the after effects of Wells in like 98, 99. I think that, and I've said it many times on the channel here, where there's a lag. A lot of people nowadays complain about um Disney and the quality of their product, so to speak, right? Or even like being woke, right? A movie like Snow White live action will come out, and there'll be a lot of people that come out and say, see, Disney's still making crap movies. I'm sure it'll be out there on YouTube and what have you. But the thing is that Disney did go through a period of time during, like, after the Pandy with Bob Chapek, where the quality was dipping. But the movies released today or last year, a lot of that stuff is really a product of like 2, 3, 4 years ago, right? So the same can be said about the Frank Wells death. It takes a while to kind of notice the impact because these movies are in production for so long. So by the time you got to like 98, 99, I think that's when you started to really feel Frank Wells's absence. And then going into the early 2000s, you really did, because Disney really started to struggle in animation in those early 2000s, and it really wasn't until they bought Pixar and brought Lasseter in like 2006, I think it was,
Yeah.
where things started to improve. But yeah, no, I would say the late 90s. Well, that's when I think we really, really, really started to feel the absence of Frank Wells. What about you, Matthew? What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say that as well. I
Yeah.
think Hunchback of Notre Dame had already been in the pipeline while Wells was still alive.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Hunchback is a beautiful movie. And actually, I think it's one of Disney's riskier movies, which I really respect. I like when Disney does that. I like when Disney takes risks, and I like when Disney isn't afraid to kind of break outside the box that society tries to put Disney in. People want Disney to just be, the kid table, like the kiddie stuff, like, oh, it's for kids. It's like, I like when Disney's like, no, that's not what we do that too, but we're gonna do some more adult themes sometimes. We're going to do the darker stuff sometimes. We're not going to be afraid to get super deep and super emotional. And Hunchback was that movie. Like, they did not care. Like, it was super, super deep. And the other thing too, even movies like Lion King. I mean, look, what they did with the Lion King, Matthew, that Mufasa death scene was on par with what Walt Disney did with Bambi. I mean, you gotta hand it to that early Renaissance era. They took risks. They brought Disney back to that Walt era in so many ways. I mean, that was a risky move, a move that I don't think that they would really make today, to be honest with you. I mean, do you think, Matthew, if they were to do an animated film, like an original story, do you think do you think we would see an emotionally gut-wrenching scene like Mufasa's death today?
I wouldn't say definitely not, but perhaps not. I honestly think their caution isn't doing them any favours.
I agree.
Caution, I think, is the key word here.
Right. I would agree. I don't think it's doing them any favors. I agree. If anyone from Disney is listening, and Matthew and I are massive Disney animation fans, we love Disney animation. Disney animation, and I've said it before on the channel, was the thing that got me into Disney. It wasn't theme parks. I loved the animation first. And I have a deep love for Disney and their animation department. And I mean, if anyone from the animation department ever watches this, if you ever come across it by any chance, I mean, try to get, and it's not the creatives, it really is Burbank, I think, but try to get them to allow you guys and gals to take some risks. Take some risks. I know it's easy to kind of fall back on the safe bet and all that stuff. And the algorithm, you need so many jokes in a movie so the kids don't get restless. I understand all that. But like, if you can break through to Burbank a little bit and just allow you to sort of get a little more freedom to take those risks, I think it'll pay off. Look, one of the biggest things, and thank God this didn't happen. Jeffrey Katzenberg, right? It's well known. Jeffrey Katzenberg wanted to get rid of Part of Your World in The Little Mermaid. He felt it was too slow. Kids aren't going to sit through that. You know, remember, Matthew? You know the story.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's like, you know what? Thank God the powers that be did not listen to that man. Thank God they didn't listen to him. And they let Howard Ashman do his thing. That song is the heartbeat and the soul of that entire movie, and it's one of Disney's most popular songs ever. In a huge library of legendary songs, that song stands amongst the best. So Disney animation department, if anyone from that, anyone from animation is listening or watching this, take those risks. Take those swings, because you know what? You never, ever know. And a lot of times the safe bet is boring. And a lot of times that's not the thing that's going to catch fire. So
hopefully Jared Bush will hear this, because he was part of Zootopia, which was quite a risky movie.
It was. I will give him that. Yeah, Jared Bush. And we actually went to D23, Matthew, the Italiano and I, and Mr. Lucas Kim. And there was a panel with Jared Bush on there. I think it was called Directing Disney. Mm. And I was really impressed with a lot of what he had to say. And he's a funny dude as well. He actually, I forgot what movie it was. He had his kid do some voice work. I forgot what movie it was. If anyone knows at home, comment down below. But he was telling the story where he had his kid do some voice work for a movie. But that scene ended up getting cut from the movie. And he was laughing about how it was so hard to tell his son that he got fired from the film. It was funny. It was really funny. But I liked his humor. And I think he seemed like a really smart dude who understands the product, who understands Disney. So I'm very optimistic, Matthew, about him coming in and running Disney animation. I think he's going to do very, very well. But speaking of Disney animation, before we close it out today, Matthew, we did a show about a year ago about Once Upon a Studio. And you had a fantastic concept in regards to kind of reimagining that short, right?
Yeah. Believing it needed to be elevated, but because of its centenary status.
Exactly. I know you're a very passionate fan of the short and what surrounded it, the history of it all, right? You've been very vocal about that. But you mentioned to me before the show today that you wanted to talk a little bit about that. Go ahead and explain what exactly you wanted to discuss with this.
I obviously made a number of changes. For example, the scene with Goofy falling up a ladder during his first attempt at taking a photo. I thought, but because knowing full well that it was in this shadow of that big a milestone, I thought it was a bit too gaggish, for lack of a better word. So
Yeah.
I felt the need to see in just as everyone on starts moving back inside. What happens is Tarzan decide it may be best to simply postpone the photo for only a few days. But Cinderella, Rapunzel, and their princes, and also Moana's family, they're still inside. And Rapunzel drops what I can only describe as like an awful, awful truth bombshell. The truth being that even without Goofy as part of the equation, it was pretty much inevitable that something was going to go wrong due to the pressure of the occasion. And I thought that level of gravitas would be good to try and broaden the short's adult appeal. And I also thought the new rendition of When You Wish Upon a Star in the original version, I don't like to say this, but it felt a bit too much like as far as the arrangement was concerned, too much like a carbon copy of the original 1940 version. And also and because I think it was Mirabelle from Encanto, she started it off on her accordion, and I think it might have been Louis from Princess and the Frog who performed on his trumpet at the beginning before Belle starts singing. I think it started too brash and ended too meek. And I thought, because it was in the face of that big a milestone, it had every right to go as hard as my version did. Because in my version, the orchestration would be much fuller, and instead of the characters everyone only joining in for the final line, they would actually sing the entire verse in it, final verse, and obviously the orchestration would be much more powerful and much louder, especially the brass and percussion sections. So I thought both the story needed amping up and the music needed amping up to try and broaden the short's adult appeal. It couldn't just be a 1950s or 1960s rehash of a short. So
Okay.
what do you think of that really long analysis? Sorry, I've droned on for a while.
No, you're fine. What do I think about, like, what your
Yeah.
about what? I'm sorry.
About whether or not my priorities were misguided in that regard to try and broaden the short's adult appeal with those specific changes.
No, I don't think it was misguided. I think your perspective is that this is a big milestone, right? This is 100 years of the Walt Disney Company, right?
So it couldn't afford to go too soft.
Right. You couldn't afford to go too soft. You wanted to really make a bigger kind of impact. Now, I love the short. I love the short as it was released. I've said, I think it's a great, Once Upon a Studio is a great short, but I can see your perspective where it's like, this is 100 years of the Walt Disney Company. Maybe we can go a little more grandiose. You know what I'm saying? And I can see that perspective. It's kind of like, Wish, for example. It's not that Wish is a bad movie. It's just for celebrating the 100 years and being, when they promote and market that movie as like every movie led up to this moment.
It tried to go hard, but it ultimately fell flat.
Yes, exactly. So I can see what you're saying with that. Now, I mean, here's the thing with Once Upon a Studio and the 100th. It's gone now, so there's not much we can really do about it. But maybe it's a lesson learned, Matthew, for future anniversaries, right? Maybe they will go a little bit harder with some of these future anniversaries for Disney animation or what have you, because I think that, look, the Disney 100, there were mistakes made for that, right? I thought it was an okay anniversary. There were glimmers of genius in there. I love Wondrous Journeys at Disneyland. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful fireworks show. I don't know. Did you ever see that on YouTube, Matthew?
Yeah, I think it.
Okay, I can send it to you if you haven't. I mean, you will love it. Being an animation guy.
Definitely one of the better fireworks shows we've seen from the last 3 or 4 years.
Absolutely. So there were glimmers of brilliance there, but then there was a lot of like missteps and fumbling in the bag. Like with the banners and the signage all around Disneyland. A lot of the anniversary stuff.
A lot of it was overshadowed by Chapek's abrupt departure.
Right. Well, that's another thing. Exactly. Chapek's departure. They didn't get a lot of the dates and even the quotes right. They weren't even correct on a lot of the stuff around the park. And that was kind of like, okay, come on, Disney. You're celebrating your own anniversary, or you should know your own history. That was embarrassing.
Know better than this.
Absolutely. That was a huge black eye. So there were missteps for sure. As a huge Disney animation guy, I would have loved to seen, just a little bit more from the 100th. I would have loved to seen a little bit more. And like, I understand the normies are on a different page than us. Like if it was up to me, the fireworks show would have had the 9 old men, projected on the castle, things like that. I mean, but the normies, you can't do that. The normies don't care, unfortunately. But I would have liked to seen a little bit more from it. It left me wanting more. Not to say it was a bad anniversary, but I just felt like there were things they could have done to sort of like just really hit that home. And it felt like a smaller anniversary than I was expecting it to be.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be this company-wide crazy thing, and it really wasn't. It was kind of like, okay, it was cute, but it wasn't like the spectacle I was expecting. And not to say there wasn't good things about it. There was, but it was just, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I also felt, just while we're still on the 100th, I also felt that if Wish fell flat, or even whatever full-length feature they happened to be doing that year, it was greenlit for the 100th. I honestly think that any full-length animated feature, unless of course it was like really, really bold, was just destined to fall flat. And that in turn would put the owners on Once Upon a Studio to go as hard as my version ultimately did. So maybe what I would have done if I was head of Walt Disney Animation Studios, I would take the suggestion of, Josh from Story Geeks.
I'm sorry, you said Josh from Story Geeks?
Yeah, he suggested the marketing for Wish, or whatever film it happened to be, regardless of whether it was Wish or not, they should tone the marketing down and just allow Once Upon a Studio to take centre stage as the centrepiece. And that in turn would give it more incentive to go harder.
Yeah, I agree with Josh. And Josh, by the way, is a great guy. We were recently at Jay Shear's screening of his short film No Vacancy. I was hosting a Q&A last month, and Josh from Story Geeks, and also his own channel, Modern Mouse. Great guy, really smart, loves animation. If people at home, if you are not subscribed to Modern Mouse on YouTube, do yourself a favor and check it out, because Josh does fantastic stuff. He even gets into like Muppets and everything. But yeah, I mean, I would agree that I think a lot of the push, the marketing, and I think even George, the Italiano said the same thing, where it's like a lot of that marketing push for Wish, it did the movie dirty. It set it up for failure. When you're marketing this movie as like from the makers of Snow White, Pinocchio, Bambi, The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, like the expectation level is like through the freaking roof. It's really unfair to this movie, which I haven't seen Wish yet, admittedly, but I've heard it's a decent movie. And I feel like they did it kind of wrong by sort of putting this expectation out there that it's supposed to live up to all these cinematic masterpieces. And it's I think that was unfair pressure on the film. If you release that same movie in an off year and promoted it differently, I think it might have done better. And also you have to remember too, and Mr. Seymour Duck, our good friend here on the channel, brought this up, and I think he made a fantastic point. The promotional period for Wish, leading up to Wish, was impacted by the writer's strike. They couldn't even promote the movie like they could normally. Their hands were tied. So there was promotions. The promotions that they did do weren't the greatest, but they were also tied because of the writer's strike, and it was a whole big thing. So yeah, Wish was really a perfect storm of just unfortunate circumstances, so we'll see. But Matthew, it's always a pleasure having you on the show, brother. We're going to do, like I said, if you're an OG55 member here on the channel, we're doing these now where members can pick a topic, and we'll make an entire video on a member topic, right? So we're going through, I think we only have like 1 or 2 left for this cycle, and we're going to put out another one very soon, so you can start submitting your topics again, but only for members. So if you're a member of OG55, you can submit a topic, and we promise you each and every topic will be made into a video. So there you go. But Mr. Matthew Muir, if you want to remind everybody where they can find you on social media, sir.
You can find me on Instagram under Matthew Thomas Muir, or one word. And on
There,
Blue Sky at matthewmuir24, all one word.
there he is. And I'll be linking both of those in the description down below. Make sure you follow Matthew. He is family here at OG55. We love Matthew. Very, very passionate Disney fan, passionate about animation, knows his stuff. And so definitely follow him. And thank you all so much for watching this episode of Orange Nerd. Comment down below with all your thoughts on everything that we've discussed today. What are your thoughts, opinions? We would love to hear from you. And until the next time, see you later.
Thank you for watching OG55. If you aren't already, consider becoming a member today.